Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Autistic Reality interview with Judy Heumann.
So I decorated.
See that. I'm really happy you used it. It's awesome.
Yeah. I'm waiting until we're both on together to get the ice cream.
Yeah.
So it doesn't melt, But I've got a plate of brownies, and I've got my book, and
That won't stay on your head.
This won't fit on my head. I don't think, will it?
It will.
So I waited until it's crooked. I love it. I waited until we were both on to get the ice cream. I'll get it whenever you say we're ready for that. But yeah, I decorated with the streamers and stuff. Thank you for joining me on this wonderful day.
Wait, are we on live now?
Oh no, we're going to take the recording from the Zoom file, and then I'm going to take the audio and give it to the radio show.
We are recording now, is what I'm saying.
Okay, great. Right. We are? Good.
Yes, we are.
Yeah, but we
awesome, wonderful.
But hold on, move over a little bit.
Sure. I don't want to.
So, Alec, I want to thank you very much, and happy birthday.
Thank you. Aww.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Alec. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you. I just watched Crip Camp, and I was a blubbering mess afterwards.
Really?
I sent a photo to Stevie, and if you look at it, I'm like liquefying. It was really emotional at the end, and it meant a great deal to me.
Well, maybe in our discussion, we can get into that also a little bit.
Yeah, no kidding.
I hope you use what we just gave you.
Yeah.
Put that in the program.
Mary, the chair of the FDR Legacy Committee, says hi.
Are you working with them?
I have a whole bunch of photos that they're using and stuff like that. So we're going to go on a little field trip to the memorial and take some photos of how it is currently. So let me get my ice cream, and then I'll.
Needed to go get a napkin.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, I've got some paper towels here. It looks like this is too solid to get in the bowl, so I'll just eat it out of the container.
Yeah. Oh, you meant the ice cream was solid, not the screen.
Yeah, the ice cream froze very well. But let's see.
What you get him?
Stevie got me cookie dough.
Oh, you like cookie dough?
Oh, yeah. It's good. And peanut butter cup, too.
Oh, really?
But that's not in this ice cream. So, Judy, you are a legend, and you're incredibly humble. You're incredibly humble, and you've literally changed the world many times over. But so tell me, you got polio as a kid. How old were you again?
I was born in 1947. I had polio in 1949. I was 18 months old.
Okay, and I understand you weren't mainstreamed in education. Very few people were back then in the disability community.
I think somehow maybe in rural areas people were more, but in urban areas. And if you used a wheelchair like me, no.
Yeah, and of course you were in Brooklyn, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like Brooklyn. So hang on, more ice cream. So at what age or what grade did you go into public school?
I went into public school when I was 9, but it was special ed classes.
Yeah, and I was in special ed too, of course, but I was also, aside from a brief period, a very brief, like month and a half long period in second grade, I was in public classes as well. It was actually, but I'm old enough, I'm 34, that it was still brand new for many people to have someone with the number of disabilities I had in public classes. So they actually,
When you say public classes, you mean regular?
I mean, general education, you know, with not special ed. And so basically my parents tell me that some ground was broken with that. And it's, you know, I'm actually meeting people in the disability community who were younger than me, for example, who still weren't mainstreamed, you know. And so forgive me if this is
there's still children today,
yeah,
who are not mainstreamed. And I think something that's important to discuss is also the role of families.
right.
Because it sounds like your parents really were advocating for you to be in a regular class.
Not just that, but they advocated for me to have my own voice. In IEP meetings, for example, they didn't have me through the whole meeting, but they had a portion where I would come in and talk about what I wanted, you know.
When did that start happening? How old were you, remember?
Truly the true integration of my viewpoint into all of my education started when we moved to a better place in the Boulder Valley School District in Boulder, Colorado, when I was in 3rd grade.
Okay.
Before that, we lived in Newton, Massachusetts, and it wasn't very friendly. They tried to have me institutionalized for the rest of my life, you know, and and I was institutionalized for a week and a half in 6th grade, and it's improved a lot since Willowbrook, but it's still not something you'd want to have happen, you know?
Oh, no. Absolutely not. So when you were in Boulder, when you were in regular classes, did you get support in the classroom?
Yes, I had paraeducators in the classrooms with me, and OT, occupational therapy. I also had a little bit of speech therapy. You can tell I have facial atonia that impacts my speech. Judy, you have...
Actually, you can't tell that.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
I was watching Crip Camp.
For your audience, they're not going to know what that is.
Yeah, it's a lack of muscle coordination in the face. You have a beautiful singing voice. You were singing Amazing Grace in the film.
I used to study voice until I left Brooklyn. Unfortunately, when I went to California, I didn't start taking voice classes again.
Well, that was really wonderful. So you were in this camp, this wonderful camp that was like an enclave, and this beacon of inclusion. You guys were running the place, right?
Not really. I mean, so it was a camp, and the children in the camp, or the youth in the camp, had disabilities. Mm-hmm. I mean, basically the management of the camp was by non-disabled people who were progressive. The camp itself obviously was a very liberal, open-minded camp, but there were not many disabled people working there.
Okay. So I did see you sort of organizing mealtime and things like that. Did campers get involved with that?
I was involved because I was on staff in 1971. And yes, the campers were involved. Here you go.
So, yeah. Did you have any favorite activities there?
You know, the camp was like other camps. So we had, you know, swimming and sports and arts and crafts and drama. I really liked being at camp, and I guess my favorite activity was just being with other people.
Aww.
And
yeah. Being social is a wonderful thing for me. I know it's not for everyone.
I mean,
But
it is, and it's not defined as an activity, right?
Yeah.
But for me, the activity of socializing is what I like the best, and then I do it, in different ways. So I was involved in, there was some theater, I remember, and as I said, swimming and other activities. But in the film Crip Camp, I was in a management position of some sort, and so I had responsibility, amongst other things, for the day that the cook would be off, and then to work with the campers and staff on getting the meals prepared that one day. And that was, I think, when I go back and I look at Crip Camp and I see that part of the discussion, what do we want for dinner? I think it's hysterical.
Yeah, it is. It's, just the everyday life, really. And I have found personally, as an autistic person, being social wasn't natural to me. It's something that I learned, but now that I've learned it, I can't get away from it. I love it, and I've encountered people, mostly autistic people, but people who aren't as well, who intentionally isolate themselves from the world. And this is just an observation, but all of them have real problems with depression, and being sad. And forgive me for this opinion, but I think that being around other people makes you happier,
Well, I think, you and me, that's true. I think some people need a combination of both, being away from people and with people. But I do think not having engagement with people can make you depressed, because
Yeah.
I don't want to generalize, but I think depression may also cause isolation. But
Yeah.
I think when, little things for me, like seeing somebody smile and smiling back to somebody, I think that's very engaging, and being interested in other people and listening to people and talking with people, for me, is something that makes me happy. Depending on the conversation, but usually I really like to be engaging with people that I can interact with well.
Yeah, I there's times when I like to be on my own too. It's not all a big social smorgasbord, but I feel you. It's varied times. So anyway, you were involved in something pivotal, the 504 movement. I was just watching that today, and I'm like, wow, you were literally living in that office building in San Francisco. Tell us about that.
So you can see, for your viewers, both looking at Crip Camp, there's a very important part in the Crip Camp film, which talks about the 504 demonstrations, which I'll get into. There's also something called The Power of 504, which is on YouTube, and it just gives you about 18 minutes. But the 504 demonstration, so in 1972, President Nixon vetoed what is called the Rehabilitation Act. At that point, it was the Rehabilitation Act of 1972. He vetoed that law, and there were demonstrations that started at that time, and that those demonstrations are partly shown in the Crip Camp film, when a group called Disabled in Action and Pride and another organization got together and demonstrated against the veto, trying to get President Nixon, who was running for office, to sign into law, which didn't happen until 1973. And
Right.
in the Rehabilitation Act, there is something called Title V, which had the first major set of provisions of law, one of which is Section 504, that prohibits discrimination against disabled individuals in any entity receiving money from the federal government. It's a very small piece of legislation, like 42, 44 words, and required a lot of work. And Health, Education, and Welfare Agency, Office of Civil Rights, was the one that took the lead, John Wodach, and it took a lot of work to be able to develop the regulations, basically explaining what 504 would look like, things like who are people with disabilities, what is an accommodation, what types of discrimination could exist, what are appropriate remedies. And so that activity went on for a number of years. And there was a group in 1975 called the American Coalition of Citizens with Disabilities. It was the first cross-disability coalition. And one of its reasons for formation was to work on passage and implementation of the 504 regulations. So 1973, the law is signed. 1976, President Ford refuses to sign the regulations, although they've been through public comment and revision. Yeah. And then it's up to President Carter's administration. And a number of disabled people worked on the Carter campaign. And we were told that when he came into office, that the regulations were signed. And basically, what we were learning is that Joseph Califano, who was then the head of Health, Education, and Welfare, was doing a review of the regulations, and that it was more than just a review for grammar and substance to make sure people would understand it. It was a review that also was undertaking the potential of making major changes to the regulations. And ACCD had decided that we would not tolerate any more amendments to the regulations, because in the process between 73 and 77, there had been a lot of negotiation. And so really the demonstrations came about because we wanted to make sure that the regulations were signed quickly and that we would be able to begin to work on implementation. And in the Bay Area, we were really more organized at that time. I had moved from Brooklyn to California. I was in graduate school and also started working with the Center for Independent Living on the board of directors.
And that's something I want to talk to you about in a few moments.
Okay, anyway, so for the 504 demonstrations, what was very important was it was a consortia of disability rights organizations in the San Francisco Bay Area, as well as working collaboratively with labor unions, progressive religious communities, the Black Panthers, people from Glide Memorial Church, the LGBTQ community, and the anti-war veterans organizations. That's really what solidified our ability to come together and be successful in our endeavor.
So you occupied the building in San Francisco, living there for several days, and then you were one of the people who went to DC, right?
Yeah, so the demonstrations were about 27 days, and a group of about 22 of us left to go to Washington to join up with ACCD and other disabled people who came to DC to support the demand to get the regulations signed. So it was a 27-day demonstration with about 150 people who were in the building. Now we were on one floor, one part of a floor in the building, which was the floor where the regional, Joseph Maldonado, the regional director for Health, Education, and Welfare's office was. It obviously moved while we were there. But it was a phenomenal experience because it was disabled individuals, many of whom had not been active in the movement, numbers of whom had gotten their disabilities when they were in their late teens or in their 20s, and became activists in the disability arena when they came into the building. I'm gonna step back because someone has to go around me.
No problem.
Hi. Happy birthday. Yay. Yeah. What?
She was shopping more often and brings my things back before people. Want to move that?
Yeah, move that.
And I would leave your top off
Yeah,
because it makes noise.
I was gonna move to the table.
Oh, you are?
It's your interview. I don't want to disturb.
So do you see parallels between that movement and the protests that are going on right now?
Well, sure. Although I think what's very important about the protests which are going on now is that clearly people around the country are getting a real, they're learning in a way that while the information was out there previously, I think many people did not get the degree of discrimination that exists in this country. And I think what's been very powerful about the Black Lives Matter work over the last 4 weeks has been the increased discussion in the media where Black people themselves, both individuals who've been victims of various forms of violence, and then people who are in leadership positions, from mayor's offices to chiefs of police to legislators to academics to people in media and film. That to me has been very, very powerful to see and have the media be open to really allowing a much higher level of, I want to say, freedom of expression that really does allow people who want to learn about what's been going on historically to do that. Now, in the area of disability, we're not there yet, and we're advancing, where our issues are coming more to the forefront, but we have a lot further to go.
Yeah, there are people with disabilities, particularly I've noticed people who are deaf and people with autism who are non-speaking, who are often victims of police brutality. I've found.
People with intellectual and developmental disabilities, people with psychosocial disabilities, people who are not able to communicate in the same way as others. But on the other hand, when you see what happened to people like George Floyd, who clearly had none of those issues, what happened to him was because he was Black.
Yeah.
And so a number of the people, who have been murdered really had no difficulty communicating. Moving your hands in the wrong direction could cause you to be murdered, even though you were being asked to provide something. And in the act of trying to provide what you were being asked to provide, the racism resulted in people being murdered.
I'm sorry, but I get like this sick thrill of seeing these racists finally being held to accountability. I think that it needs to be more widespread, because for every incident that's filmed, there are hundreds that aren't filmed, but to see these hateful people getting what's coming to them, it's almost like schadenfreude,
Yeah, I think absolutely it's very important that justice occurs, and that people who have committed these crimes are in fact prosecuted. I also think that when you look at some reactions of people to not only the incident in Arizona where a white woman told a Latina woman she should go back to her country, you know, where the white woman in New York called on the phone that a Black man was threatening her.
And she literally said, I'm calling the police because they mistreat you guys and I want you to be a victim of brutality. That's what she literally said that on camera.
And
you know,
she knew as a white woman that she believed as a white woman that it would evoke the police's immediate attention, and in a negative way, because she was saying there was a perpetrator who was Black. But for me, I'm hoping, and you know, we have disabled Black people who are protesting, and non-disabled, and disabled people who are not Black also protesting. I mean, I haven't gone to the demonstrations because of COVID.
Me neither. I'm sorry. I mean, you know, I have a condition called HHT. It's very rare, and it's a blood and blood vessel disorder. And my brain surgeon, when I was first diagnosed, said, Alec, you have to stay away from crowds. And I'm like, no, I'm not staying. I'm not staying away from crowds, but I will definitely stay away. That rally, that disability rally, there were 150,000 people on the streets that day. I'm not going to go out that when there's a deadly disease going around, you know? I'm sorry, I have my limits.
I totally admire Carrie Gray and other organizers who are doing this, because it's very important that other minority communities begin to recognize that there are disabled people in all these different groups, and we need to ensure that we're fighting for the rights of, in the issue of Black Lives Matter, the lives of all Black people, including those with disabilities. And as we said, the disproportionate number of Black people with disabilities who are arrested, in prison, victims of crime and murder at the hands of police and others
Believe me, I admire the heck out of them. Don't want to swear too much, but you know, I admire the heck out of them. I also think, though, that something I've noticed in the disability community is that the people who get the news stories about them and the people who get the most public notice are the people who are consistently out there waving placards and things. And that is very good and very powerful. But for example, I sit on 10 billion committees, you know, I do things like interviews with you. I talk to a couple hundred people in each speech and about disability and pop culture. That doesn't get news though, because I'm not, you know, storming the streets, you know. I think that there needs to be more media coverage of the disability world as a whole.
Why, okay, so I don't believe that the reason why the Black Lives Matter activities, demonstrations are getting coverage is because of is because of some of the demonstrators that have not been acting peacefully. I think it's a combination. I think it's a combination of things. One is the issue of disability itself is still, unfortunately, a new issue in the media. They're not, as a rule, covering disability from a human rights, a justice model, disability rights justice model. And so I think we are needing to continue to both get people in the field. I mean, that's really one of the issues. The reason I made the point earlier that it's so wonderful to be looking at the broad array of people who are Black in all these different fields coming forward and being able to speak on so many different levels. While we definitely have a growing number of disabled people who are able to do that, we don't have the same levels of research and other activities that not only in the Black community, but Latino and other communities. So I think there are a lot of areas that we're still needing to build up on, but I think without a doubt,
you're completely right about all of that. I'm just saying that other forms of disability advocacy are not getting noticed as much as that form. I'm saying they do deserve all of that coverage. I'm saying there should be more coverage of disability entirely, which is we're unfortunately not getting. Now you have kind of sort of become a member of the establishment. You worked for the Department of State for years, and you've done a lot of international advocacy. Tell us about that.
So I think it was in 1972 that I started getting involved in disability work internationally, in part because my parents, I'm Jewish, and my parents both came from Germany and were sent out when they were teenagers and we had no grandparents and other relatives that died in the concentration camps. So we always had an international part of ourselves. And I went with my brother and some friends to the 1972 Paralympic Games that were held in Heidelberg, Germany. And that's when I started meeting other disabled people internationally, and was very fortunate that a group called Rehabilitation International brought me over to Europe. I spent about 6 weeks traveling to different countries, meeting with other disabled people, and met a number of people who were of my age who also were beginning to become activists in their own countries. Mm-hmm. So really, it was after 1972 that I started getting involved with other disabled people in other countries, and probably more in 76, 77 and forward. And we learned that many of our problems were the same.
Yeah.
And the degree of the discrimination and remedies that were being developed really in part depended on where countries were themselves. So we had stronger civil rights laws at that point, even though like 504 was really a law that people around the world started looking at. And then of course, when the Americans with Disabilities Act was being developed and came out in 1990, that really was a national piece of legislation that disabled people around the world were learning more about. So we were definitely a beacon for people to look at our activism and how in many ways our activism paralleled the work that was going on in other political movements, and the value of laws with strong implementation provisions, which didn't exist in many countries at that point.
Yeah, so I've been overseas myself a bit. I'm seeing that Western Europe, which is where I've been, has taken the ADA and they try to improve upon it where they can. I found, if you've got a 1,000-year-old castle, they do the best they can. If they can't make it physically accessible, they try to make exhibits, in an accessible area. But for example, I was in a zoo in Hamburg, Germany. The Hagenbeck Zoo is wonderful. Most of the animals either roam free or don't have cages. You can let yourself be climbed on by lemurs. You can feed the elephants. You can pet the penguins. And I noticed that they had like a lot of creeks and things around their landscape, but there would always be a strategic little, beautiful bridge that looked like a landscape feature. But what it was really there to do was to be for people with mobility impairments to get around. And they were always thinking of that, So do you think that do you think they've managed to take this and kind of run with it in some places?
I think in countries around the world, for many reasons, we are seeing renovations and new construction that are accessible. And the standards may be different than ours, but I think as the disability communities have gotten stronger in countries around the world, we've also seen better results. But I think it goes without saying that we still experience in many countries new construction that's happening that's not accessible, and that there'll be more accessible construction going on in public buildings and in private buildings. But I think things are improving, and in part because the disability community in other countries is becoming much more organized. The Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities really has been a landmark treaty that about 176 countries have ratified, unfortunately not us. And that's also enabling many different things, which is resulting in various forms of accessibility.
Right.
I can stop for a second.
Okay. While she's gone, people who understand this, please bear in mind that the convention requires nothing of us. We already live up to its standards and more. The convention will simply help us be a good role model to the rest of the world.
I think when looking at the treaty, I would say that one of the benefits of our ratifying the treaty is also that we can learn from what other countries are doing.
Yes.
We can learn how to do a better job. I mean, I think the ADA is a wonderful piece of legislation, but there are important new pieces of legislation that we need to be looking at to address many things like personal assistance services, home and community-based services. And as technology and other things are changing, we're needing to ensure that regulations and laws are up to date. So I would say that we should be ratifying the treaty because it's the right thing to do. We need to ratify the treaty because it will, yes, absolutely allow us to share the work that we're doing with others and to learn from others. And who knows, you know, it might result in our learning and expanding work that we're already doing.
Yeah. You know, I was just pointing out that it, you know, it's basically based on mostly on ADA standards, and it wouldn't require much new of us. The people who are scared of the treaty basically fear UN supremacy or something, and even if that's a bad thing, it's not like, which it's not. It's not gonna, you know, infringe on our rights. You know, they're scared for no reason. So yeah, they're basically scared for no reason of the convention. You know, it's this idea that the U.S. is greater than the world. Frankly, we have a lot to learn from the rest of the world.
And some of the people who just hold such animosity against the United Nations and anything which is a part of the United Nations, they oppose just on the face of it. When I think, you know, actually in the disability arena, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, even its creation, so much modeled the way we were able to get the ADA, for example, passed, was the ability for disabled people from countries around the world to come to New York and meet with their delegations a number of times a year for a couple of weeks at a time, to allow people to really listen and understand the kinds of barriers and discrimination people with all types of disabilities were experiencing. And I think that's like with the Americans with Disabilities Act, allowing legislators to see that it wasn't that, allowing legislators to understand that the discrimination that we faced in the United States, but in many ways still face today, is significant.
Right.
And, you know, we needed a national law in order to address problems that were facing us as a nation.
I'm a big fan of universal design. The ADA, as much as it's done, is basic essentials. You know, it doesn't even mandate automatic doors, which it should, but it doesn't. So, and I mean, from what I understand, they literally, the committees that were writing it up did studies, what is the bare basic minimum we can offer the disabled community? And that's a wrong position to take. And I have studied universal design at the Idea Center in Buffalo, New York, and I am a big fan. Where do you see policy going in terms of, I mean, is universal design something that you feel we can legislate at all, or I'm just rambling here?
What do you need, honey?
That was my alarm. Sorry.
Hold on. You interview my husband.
Yeah. Is universal design something you feel we can legislate at all, or is there any hope with that?
I mean, I think there are a number of issues. One of them is in looking to amend the law, if we don't have a Congress that's supportive, is a problem, because the amendments could in fact weaken the laws. So we have to be very careful about that. I think the standards that we have in place, standards can always be amended. I also think that, you know, one of the big issues, Alec, is we need support from the American public that they want universal design. And I think that's a combination of bottom up and top down. And by bottom up, I'm saying, you know, if people without disabilities really begin to have an understanding of why universal design is important for them, then they become a part of the movement, which is demanding that we have better standards in place, so that as new roads and houses and buildings, you know, for example, are being built, that we know that they are going to be universally designed. People don't know what it means, universal design. You know, they don't understand it. They not only don't understand it in many ways, but they need to experience it. And I think one of the values about a discussion around universal design versus accessible design is universal design is universal. And what we're trying, as you're saying, what we're trying to do is to make sure that people are not looking at these accessibility features as something which only benefit a narrow population.
Exactly, as the
large population.
Yeah, the Idea Center's definition, and I love this, is designed for anyone, anywhere, anytime.
Okay,
and
so
I love that.
What is that?
Exactly. Well, I have a big book sitting over there that.
You need to tell your audience. What is the Idea Center?
Oh, sorry. The Idea Center is the Universal Design Center at the University of Buffalo. And they are, I'd like to say, quite reputable, but I'm biased, you know. And they do studies and develop new technologies for everyone all the time. And they've come up, hang on one sec. They teach an always evolving, this is their book, and I love it. I absolutely love it. And they teach classes at the university on universal design, multiple classes in different levels of advancement. At the end of the very basic class, every student has to come up with a new universal design feature. My mother's on oxygen, so I came up with the idea of having custom-built homes or community centers that have oxygen-enriched environments. And some people were kind of skeptical about that, thought it was kind of outlandish. But then the professor in charge of the center actually says, actually, we've got some centers that are doing that right now, you know? So, you know, it's kind of a great minds think alike sort of thing, you know?
Yeah.
You know, so anyway, I promised our friend Mary Dolan at the FDR Memorial Legacy Committee, that I would ask you for your points of view on the FDR Memorial, which is in a way the memorial to disability in DC. So
I love the FDR Memorial. I have deep respect for the people who fought for a statue of President Roosevelt in his wheelchair, and how it's in the very front of the monument. To me, I love the monument itself, but obviously, you know, being a wheelchair rider, coming to that monument and seeing him proudly sitting there in a way that he probably couldn't do when he was president, you'd just be out there in his wheelchair. I know that he's historically received criticism for not being as open about his disability. But quite frankly, I think given the time, I think it's reasonable to assume that if people knew that he was getting around in a wheelchair, that they well may not have supported him. So I think it's very unfortunate, but now that we're in a different era, I think, you know, him as our statue is wonderful. I take people there all the time.
Everybody who comes to visit me in DC, I take them to that memorial, everyone. And there's this, when Jim Dixon was giving his tour to my 2011 AAPD internship class, he said, get next to the memorial, and if you're in a wheelchair, you could say that you're the next president in a wheelchair next to the first president in a wheelchair.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, that was quite powerful. So there's this question I ask everybody who's on my show, whether it be YouTube or printed article or podcast. I'm very involved in disability and entertainment, and I'm also an entertainment critic. I write for Flickering Myth and Starburst and a whole bunch of people. So there is, I'm involved in Terry Harmon Squire's Lights, Camera, Access. There are disabled people who want to get into entertainment. I'm not just talking acting, I'm talking set design, writing novels, stage productions, and we are here, and we are very talented, and we are very willing to work with the entertainment industry. What are your tips for disabled people getting into entertainment and for the industry to accommodate them?
Well, I think when I was a fellow at the Ford Foundation from 2017 through 2018, my project was on looking at the issue of representation of disabled people behind and in front of the camera. And we produced a paper called A Roadmap to Inclusion, Changing the Face of Disability in Media. Mm-hmm. And the report itself both documented the absence of disability and also looked at other minority groups and work that they'd been doing, for example, in inclusion of Chinese people and Asians in media, Black individuals, Latinos, others. And the paper is on my YouTube channel, or you can get it from the Ford Foundation. But the paper really not only lays out the problem, but also makes recommendations. And I'm working right now with Dredoff and Lawrence Carter Long on a project that's being supported by Ford and a number of other foundations, where we're looking at what more we can be doing to advance the voices of disabled people in various forms of media. Now we've got groups now like Terry Squire Hartman, Lights Action, Lights Camera Action, the Rudiman Foundation, and others that have been doing work in media and disability. But I think we're really needing a stronger, more robust voice of disabled people who can both talk about the successes, the barriers, and then work with these various industries to ensure that disabled people are a part of the training programs, the hiring that's going on, the internship programs that are happening, etc.
So, you know, I've talked to some people who are not small names. Two of them said roughly the same thing about that. I talked to Joe Quesada, who's a friend of mine, and he's the head of Marvel Entertainment. And I talked to Diana Gabaldon, who's the author and creator of Outlander, which everybody's crazy about these days. They both said that they recognize that it's a biased field and that we're being excluded. They said that given the current framework that's existing, the best thing is to literally, even bluntly, connect with people already in the entertainment industry. You know, disregard protocol. Try to friend them on their social media or something like that. Make your voice heard, you know, make sure they're aware you exist, you know. What do you think of that? Do you think that that's, I mean, that's given the current framework, but, you know, are there ways we can improve that?
Of course that's important, but what's really important is that companies are looking at the work that they're producing, whether it's in the newsroom, on television, in documentaries and films, and the various jobs that exist in all these fields. I think it's really having people understand that our stories are important stories to tell, that disabled people, like others, have interest and qualifications to work in these various jobs, and to really look at what are some of the success stories that have been happening. But we need the voices of disabled people, both from the individual fields and across these fields, to also be able to tell stories about what people's experiences have been. I mean, what's one of the important parts of what's going on right now with Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement and others? It's people coming forward and telling their stories that they were afraid to tell before, or that weren't being reported. So, you know, a disabled person working in a newsroom who is not being given opportunities to advance because of disability, we need to hear those stories. We need to hear what their experiences have been. We need to hear that it's not just an individual person, but many people who will, like other groups, tell similar stories. If there isn't a conscious effort on the part of leadership to clearly look at what they need to do to be inclusive of disability, it's not going to happen as it needs to happen as quickly as it should have.
I would like to pimp my dear friend J.D. Michaels and our project, the stories about his project. Well, it's just him. I've kind of stepped back for a little while, but we're involved in producing books, both fiction and nonfiction, written by disabled authors. Not all of them are about disability, but it's all by people with disabilities, and
That's as it should be.
Yeah, exactly, and it's working to empower us in the disability community and produce our works, you know. And listen, I don't want to take all of your day, and I realize that we've been going on for like 45 minutes now or something, but a long time. I wanted to thank you profusely for celebrating my birthday with me. And as I told Stevie, I am doing one-on-one get-togethers with people because I don't want to run the risk of a crowd. And also I'm waiting for some of the celebration until this thing dies down. So maybe when you feel safe again or something, we can do something to celebrate or just to catch up, you know?
Maybe this summer we could do something outside.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of the restaurants are opening outdoor patios and things like that. But
so I want to say, Alec, that I'm really glad you're doing this. And what I think is very important is getting the voices of disabled individuals who are doing work in various areas to enable the general population to understand both the types of discrimination that we are experiencing, efforts that are being made to address these issues, and to be able to get more people to really become advocates and allies, both those of us with disabilities who have not really spoken up and out, and non-disabled people who may well in the future, as I say on the program with Trevor Noah, temporarily able-bodied people who in the future will acquire a disability temporarily or permanently. And when looking at issues like you were raising around universal design, that's only one example. If we look at universal design, if we look at representation of disabled people in the media across the various fields, if the general public, including disabled individuals, speaks up and out against the producers of these materials, and says we want greater representation to include disabled people across the board. We have rich stories to tell. Disabled Black people, Asian people, Muslim people, Jewish people, Christian people, on and on. We have rich stories that need to be told, and then we just need to be the performer in the corner selling frankfurters, and the person in the writing room, and the design sets, etc. So thank you for bringing these issues forward.
yeah, thank you. I listen, Judy, I love you. You're a wonderful person, and peace be with you in these days.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, you take care. Okay, goodbye.
Bye.
Please make sure to order Judy's wonderful book, Being Human, an unrepentant memoir of a disability rights activist. You can find it at IndieBound, Barnes & Noble, and on Amazon. Please check out The Human Perspective on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. You can find links in the notes accompanying this video on the Autistic Reality YouTube channel. Thank you for tuning in. Bye.